Hey everybody, welcome to Unit 3, Part 3 of our course, which is going to cover, as you can see in the description here, Chapters 6, 7, and 8. And so remember, when you get to the unit there, you have to click on each item to move forward there. But our first chapter in this unit is all about emotion. So Chapter 6 is about emotion. It's a really interesting chapter. You'll find it's one of the shorter chapters we're going to cover in the course here, so maybe mercifully so, it's going to be shorter for you here. And does cover some pretty interesting topics, especially in the opening of the chapter. It tells you about how there's going to be this challenge to look at emotion as something that's not necessarily always something that's bad for us. You're going to hear this expression that emotions jeopardize reason, or so some have thought, but there's actually some good news about emotions there too, and you'll especially see that towards the end of the chapter there when you do your homework there on the issue of happiness, or positive psychology as it's called. That's some really interesting stuff there, so I hope you enjoy learning about that. But one thing that emotions do for us is that they do impact our behavior, and they especially impact our construal, how we perceive things out there. So depending on what feeling or mood that you've got, it's going to definitely impact how you're going to size up a situation. It will definitely do that. The second chapter in this section here, Chapter 7, is all about attitudes, and that's really classic social psychology material there. And one of the interesting things you're going to cover right away in the chapter there is not just what makes up an attitude in the first place, but also this puzzle. Why do we oftentimes see that there's a disconnect between a person's attitude and their actual behavior? We would like to think that, well, if somebody has a certain attitude, that's going to lend itself to or predict a certain kind of behavior, but that's not always the case. And likewise, the reverse there too. Can we use a person's behavior to infer or predict what their attitude might be? So some really interesting food for thought there, and the bulk of the chapter is devoted to examining both of those possibilities, that attitudes will predict behavior, or that behavior will predict your attitude. And certainly sometimes ourselves, we realize that disconnect, that we think one thing or feel one thing with our attitude, but we act in a different way. And when we notice our own disconnect, sometimes with this, we experience a particular phenomenon that you're going to learn about that's called cognitive dissonance. It's really classic social psychology stuff, and maybe you learned about it like in your intro to psych course there too. So we're going to really drill down into that topic a lot, because it's really fascinating stuff there, if you will. So that's all I'll say there about Chapter 7. I won't spoil any more of it for you there. And the last chapter in this section is really one of my favorite chapters to cover, and that's the chapter on persuasion. That's Chapter 8. And one thing you're going to learn about persuasion right away is that there's more than one way to persuade someone, including yourself being persuaded there. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not like this go-to thing you can always count on to always persuade somebody and get them to change their mind and or their behavior, as you're going to see. But there are certainly some ways to do it, and we're going to do some really interesting drill down into this. There's some real specific factors that play a role in your success or lack thereof to persuade somebody else. So it's some really fun stuff, and stuff we can all relate to there, because we've all been on the receiving end of a persuasive argument, whether it's just some silly commercial trying to sell us a bag of potato chips, all the way up to the really important stuff like changing your attitudes about things like the death penalty, or a certain surgical procedure that you might choose over a different procedure there. The life and death sort of persuasion that we have to undergo sometimes. So it's really intriguing stuff there. And there's also some interesting information in the chapter there towards the tail end of it there of the failure of persuasion. So despite those best laid plans, despite all those best efforts there, we just aren't always persuaded. Doesn't always work, right? Think about those anti-drinking and driving campaigns there. Think about those campaigns to get people to practice safer sex and avoid STIs or unwanted pregnancies. You can tell people all the best information in the world, and they just won't be persuaded. And so there's this issue of resistance to persuasion, which is really fascinating stuff there too, and there's reasons for that. And we'll get to all that too in our chapters. So that's really all I wanted to say for right now. Remember, again, do your discussions, do your quizzes. They're all listed there in the module as far as the unit there, and the due dates for all those. Be working on your paper, because the final literature review paper is going to be due shortly after this unit is over. So make sure that you have that ready there as well. You'll find instructions and everything you need there, and the second component instructions in the paper there under that APA literature review module you'll find there on Canvas. So take a look at that, especially the links to the sample completed papers that I provided there for you. That'll really help you out. And otherwise, good luck on your unit here. You'll be able to proceed through them. Again, just click each item in order and you won't have any trouble getting to any of the content and material there. So I will see you another time. So take care.